You've seen how complex forms can be created from simple forms to things like rotational geometry and components. Another way to do that is through customized image textures. So here's an example. To create the facade of the cathedral, I went online and Googled for a drawing of the cathedral facade. And this is just a simple image texture from online. But when I import this image texture into SketchUp as a regular texture, and I apply it to a blank surface, it shows up like this with a background. The white background of the original drawing. Now that's a problem because when I zoom in on the idealized and finished model, there is depth and transparency. So you can see the silhouette of the edge of the texture, you can see through other components like these balustrades, or you can see through components like this arcade. And that transparency of the texture gives the model an appearance of accuracy and detail. And all of that is lost with this texture because the background is there and you can't really use it. Now, I've gotten around that problem by going into Photoshop and by erasing the background of that texture. So here's the original image, and I just go in, and there are different ways to erase the background of an image and to crop out parts of an image. And for this exercise, I'll just use an eraser tool. So I get the eraser tool, and I kind of follow along the edge of the model, erasing all of the parts that I don't need. And you can adjust the brush size. You got small enough to get inside those little cracks. And it's a tedious process, it takes a while, and there are different ways around it. But when you're done, the image will look something like this, which is a lot better. The black and white checkerboard means that there is no background. You've removed the background. And now, we don't save it as an image file as a JPEG, we save it as a PNG file. It has to be a PNG file, because a PNG file allows for that transparency and that ideal background. And now, when we go back to SketchUp and import this texture, the background looks entirely different. Here you have a transparent background. And so all of that seeming geometrical complexity of the facade is really just a flat surface. Now to make it look even more convincing, we can go in and hide the edges of that flat texture. So you can't tell where texture stops and where background begins. And we can further go in and start to add depth to this texture. For instance, I'll go in and select a section of the tower, that part, and I'll make that into a component. I select it, I click on it, and I make it a component. And this component can be rotated. So I'll rotate the component, and I'll apply the component to the surface. So here we go. We've taken one image and we've applied it to the surface. Now the image starts to look more convincing. Of course, it'll take more work and more detail to do the entire facade, but you start to get the idea. Where we've had simple components, simple images cropped, and then when we turn off image textures, you start to see that actually all this complexity is nothing more than two polygons. It's an illusion. And the same process can be repeated for all other parts of the cathedral. For instance, these balustrades right here. So when we go into Photoshop and open a balustrade, here is a texture of a balustrade I found, and it has a white background, and so what I've done is I just go inside and I delete the part I don't need. I'm going to use the magic wand tool and to delete that part, and I delete the background of this balustrade and I crop it. So here's the original one, and here it is cropped and adjusted. In this case, the balustrade is a very simple form. So we've cropped it and removed the background for the part that should be transparent. And in SketchUp, it shows up something like this. So we can go into that part and select the balustrade and select that texture. And you'll see that the texture is actually quite small. It's that little area between those four little adjustable parts. And we've done that for all the other parts of the model. So here is an elevation online of the inside and outside, and here it is cropped. So we're taking an image, we're cropping it for just the section we need of one bay, and we're deleting the background for the parts that should be transparent, things like windows or tracery or depth. And when we apply that to the building, you get complex forms, like the facade, in this case the side of the building in elevation. This part in Photoshop, a flat 2D texture with transparent windows, has become this part in SketchUp with depth and transparency. The inside of the cathedral is like that too. Here's a drawing by Viollet-le-Duc, an architect from the 19th century. And we've gone in and deleted all of the parts that should be transparent. So the details of the insides of the window. This part we've made transparent, the inside of the window. And when we're done, you got something like this, right here, for the arcade level of the interior. When we go back to the inside of the cathedral, it looks something like this, where you can see through that arcade because I've erased that part of the texture in Photoshop. And so when you move around, you actually see that it's just a flat surface. It's actually not transparent. But by applying a transparent texture to it, you've achieved what looks like a pretty complex form when there's no underlying complexity. And this both saves on file size, it saves on labor, and it allows this model to load much faster in the web browser. So here we're creating a model that's optimized for online use. And this requires special textures, reducing geometric complexity, saving time, and cutting corners, but without cutting the detail and quality of the finished product.